Good day, everyone. I am Lindy Mayo, and for today's, we will be tackled about geologic time, a story of rocks. So, what is the geologic time scale? What does the time scale represent? The geologic time scale divides up the history of the Earth based on life forms that have existed during a specific time since the creation of the planet. These divisions are called geochronologic units. Geo means rock and chronology means time. So the geologic timescale is divided by the following divisions: the aeons, eras, periods, and epochs. Aeons is the longest subdivision. It is based on the abundance of certain fossils. Eras is the next to longest subdivision. It is marked by major changes in the fossil record. Period based on types of life existing at the time. And the last is the epoch, shortest subdivision, marked by differences in life forms and can vary from continent to continent. So most of these life forms are found as fossils, which are the remains or traces of an organisms from the geologic past that has been preserved in sedimentary rock. Without fossils, scientists may not have concluded that the earth has a history that precedes mankind. So next is due to the fact that the early geologists had no way of knowing how the discoveries of the earth were going to develop. Geologists over time have put the time scale together piece by piece. Units were named as they were discovered. Sometimes, units names were borrowed from local geography, from a person, or from the type of rock that dominated the unit. So examples are the Cambrian, from the Latin name for Wales, named for exposures of strata found in a type section in Wales by British geologist Adam Sedgwick. Next is the Devonian, named after a significant outcrops first discovered near Devonshire, England. The Jurassic, named after for representative strata first seen in the Jura Mountains by German geologist Humboldt in 1795. And last is the Cretaceous, from the Latin creta, meaning chalk, by a Belgian geologist. So the earliest time of the earth is called the Hagian and refers to a period of time for which we have no rock record. And the Archean followed, which corresponds to the ages of the oldest known rocks on earth. These with the Proterozoic Aeon are called the Precambrian Aeon. The remainder of geologic time, including present day, belongs to the Panerozoic Aeon. So, while the units making up the time scale are called geochronological units, the actual rocks formed during those specific time intervals are called chronostratigraphic units. The actual rock record of a period is called a system. So, rocks from the Cambrian period are the Cambrian system. So these are the figure of geologic time scale. So next we have the principle behind the geologic time. So first is Nicholas Steno, is a Danish physician, describe how the position of a rock layer could be used to show the relative age of the layer. He devised the three main principles that underlie the interpretation of geologic time. So these three principles are the superposition, the principle of horizontality, and the principle of original lateral continuity. The principle of superposition is the layer on the bottom was deposited first and so is the oldest, while the principle of horizontality, all rocks layers are originally deposited horizontally, and the lateral continuity is originally deposited layers of rock extend laterally in all directions until either thinning out or being cut off by different rock layers. So these important principles have formed the framework for the geologic area of stratigraphy, which is the study of layered rock or the strata. So decades later, other European scientists discovered Steno's laws and began applying them. Abraham Gottlob Werner became famous for his proposal that all rocks came from the ocean environment. He and his followers were called Neptunists. An opposing view, or Bivoisians, argued that all rocks of the earth came from volcanic environment. So these scientists were called the Platonists. Next is James Hutton, a Scottish physician and geologist that thought the surface of the earth was an ever-changing environment, and the past history of our globe must be explained by what can be seen to be happening now. This theory was called uniformitarianism. So uniformitarianism is a later catchphrase as the present is the key to the past. So next is William Smith, was a surveyor who was in charge of mapping large part of England. He was the first to understand that certain rock units could be identified by the particular assemblages of fossils they contained. Using this information, he was able to correlate strata with the same fossils for many miles, giving rise to the principle of biologic succession. The principle of biologic succession is it means that each age in the Earth's history is unique, such that fossil remains will be unique. This permits vertical and horizontal correlation of the rock. Even though these two outcrops are separated by a large distance, the same rock layer can be correlated with the other because of the presence of the same shark teeth. This lets scientists to know that the two layers were deposited at the same time, even if the surroundings rocks look dissimilar from each other. During the early 1800s, English geologist Charles Lyell published a book called Principles of Geology, which became a very important volume in Great Britain. It included all Houghton's ideas and presented his own contemporary ideas, such as the principle of cross-cutting relationships and the inclusion principle. The cross-cutting relationship is a rock of feature that cuts across another feature, must be younger than the rock that it cuts, while the inclusion principle is a small fragments of one type of rock but embedded in a second type of rock must have formed first and were included when the second rock was forming. So, next we have Charles Darwin. He was an unpaid naturalist who signed up for 5-year expedition around the world abroad, the HMS Beagle. On this trip, he realized two major points. In spite of all species reproducing, no one species ever roamed the earth, including not all individuals produced in a generation survive. He also found that individuals of the same kind differ from one another, and concluded that those with the most favorable variation would have the best chance of surviving to create the next generation. The theory of natural selection was created to Darwin along with Alfred Russel Wallace. So, and he went to write the famous Origin Species. So, there are two goals of Darwin in that work were to convince the world that evolution had occurred and organisms had changed over geologic time. And number two is the mechanism for this evolution was natural selection. So let's proceed to the relative age dating. So relative age means the age of one object compared to the age of another, not the exact age of an object. This method can only use when the rock layers are in the original sequence. All six of the original stratigraphic principles may be applied to determine the age of rock. This process is called age dating. So correlation of strata by rock unit, type, lithology, or fossil type or the biology using species, composition, or texture leads areas of land. Because rock layers can be matched up, we can guess that they are formed during the same period, so they are usually are the same age. So there are three types of unconformities that help us determine relative ages of rock layers: the angular, disconformity, and nonconformity. So use angular is the horizontal beads are uplifted and tilted or eroded, followed by new deposition of horizontal beads. The figure to the right is an angular unconformity. So disconformity is the episodes of erosion or non-deposition between layers, and nonconformity is the sediment is deposited on top of recorded volcanic or metamorphic rock. It indicates very long passage of time. Using the principle of original horizontality and superposition, we can conclude that all this rock is always on the bottom because it's deposited first. So, deciphering the sequence of a rock outcrop is sometimes complicated by a features within a rock record called unconformities, which are a specific contact between rock layers. So, relative ages can also be determined using the Lyell's principle of cross-cutting relationships. So, in the figure to the right, both the gray and the yellow horizontal strata needed to be in the place for the pink to cut them. Therefore, the pink layer is the youngest. So next is the relative age dating with index fossils. Biostratigraphy is the correlation of stratigraphic units based on fossil content. Biostratigraphically useful species are known as index fossils or guide fossils because they can be used as guides for recognition of chronostratigraphic units. Index fossils are widespread, have short temporal durations resulting from rapid lifespans, are abundant throughout their geographic and geologic ranges, and are easily recognized or unique. So the photo to the right is a trilobite from the Mesopotamian period. Trilobites are commonly used index fossils because they are easy to recognize. We know exactly when certain species become extinct, such that we can compare rock layers that contain trilobites with a second rock layer, and based on position determine if the second rock layer is younger. So fossils found in many rock layers have lived for long periods of time and cannot be used as index fossils. Next, we have the absolute age dating. Absolute ages or geographic ages of rocks can be assigned to the geologic time scales on the basis of properties of atoms that make up the mineral. Unlike relative dating, which relies on a sequence of rock layers, absolute dating can produce an actual ages in years. So the number of neutrons of an atom determines the isotope of the element, just like the number of protons determines the identity of an element. What is half-life? Each radioactive parent isotope decays to daughter's product at a specific and measurable rate. This measurement is reported in half-lives. The half-life of an isotope is the time takes for one and half of the parent atoms in the isotope to decay. If an isotope has a half-life of 400 years, 4,000 years, then after 4,000 years and half of the parent isotope remains. After another 4,000 years, 12,000 years total, one half more of the remaining amount decays, so after three half-lives, there are only remains 1/8 of the original parent isotope. If a scientist knows that the half-life of the parent and measures the proportion of parent isotope to daughter isotope, she can calculate the absolute age rock of this valuable method is called radiometric dating. So isotopes with very long half-lives are not suitable for dating rocks younger than 1 million years because they are few daughter atoms to be measured accurately. Experimental error limits measurements to those rocks younger than about 12 half-lives of the isotope used. So these figures commonly use radioactive isotope. So, uranium lead decay series. Unlike carbon-14 dating, uranium dating cannot be used to date formerly living things. However, it is the most commonly used method in igneous rock dating because of the abundance of zircon minerals. The subscript of 235 and 238 are the atomic mass numbers of the element. Though each isotope has 92 protons in its nucleus, U-235 has 143 neutrons and U-38 has 146 neutrons. So, the Earth through time. The Proterozoic is no life possible as the Earth initially forms 4.6 billion years ago. Simple single-celled forms of life appeared 3.8 billion years ago, becoming more complex and successful over the next 3 billion years. Prokaryotes then eukaryotes. Cyanobacteria begins producing free oxygen or the photosynthesis. Land masses gather to make up a continent. Next, we have the Cambrian. It is explosion of life. All existing phyla come into being at this time. Life forms in warm seas as oxygen level rise enough to support life. Next is the Ordovician. The first animals with bones appear, though dominant animals are still trilobites, pancreapods, and corals. The beginning of the construction of South Carolina. Next is Solarian. At this time, first land plants appear and land animals follow. Devonian, age of the fish. The next is Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian. The Permian, last period of the Paleozoic. The Triassic is the first dinosaurs appear. First mammals, small rodents appear. Life and fauna rediversify. Rocky mountains form. Jurassic, Pangaea still breaking apart. Dinosaurs flourish, or the golden age of the first birds appear. Cretaceous, T-Rex develops. First snakes and primates appear. Deciduous trees and grasses common. The Tertiary, at this time first horses appear and tropical plants dominate. Grasses spread and whales, rhinos, elephants, and other large mammals develop. Sea level rises and limestone deposits from the Eocene. Quaternary, modern humans develop and ice sheets are predominant. Holocene humans flourish. So let's proceed to the punctuated events through geologic time. Impact is the most well-known extinction of the dinosaur. Scientists think that this mass extinction was caused by a large comet that impacted the Earth present-day Mexico, causing a massive quantity of dust to rise up into the atmosphere, possibly blacking out the sun and affecting oxygen levels Earth. It took millions of years for the Earth to recover, and when it did, the large dinosaurs were gone forever. Next is the climate changes. Climate has always been a constantly changing phenomenon. The earliest atmosphere was devoid of free oxygen, and it wasn't until the earliest life forms evolved that the present-day atmosphere began to form approximately 600 million years ago. Obviously, not all life can adapt to the extreme cold. Also, not all animals can adapt to the warming climate at the end of an ice age, which probably contributed to the extinction of the woolly mammoth. Next is volcanic activity. Significant volcanic activity which produced ash clouds in the air and lava flows on the Earth's surface was common during Precambrian. It was extremely hot and most life forms could not exist in these conditions. Volcanism is a common byproduct of tectonic plate collision. If one plate collides with another and is pulled underneath it, a subduction zone is formed underneath the plates and a volcanic arc forms on the Earth's surface. If volcanism is significant enough to produce mass quantities of ash and volatile gases, wind can carry this into upper atmosphere all around the world, potentially enveloping the Earth's semi-darkness and reducing insolation on Earth. So why extinction? Extinction of species occurs when no more members of a particular species remains. Extinction through time is very common, and in fact nearly 90% of all species that ever lived on Earth were now extinct. So, natural phenomenon that can contribute to the extinction of a species can include global climate changes, volcanic explosion, and celestial impact. The influence of humans on the environment do not include comet impacts or volcanism. However, man has caused extinction all the same. Over the past 100 years, man has cut rainforest and woodland forest, destroying natural habitats. Pollution from industrial plants and vehicles has also affected the air we breathe and contributed to the greenhouse gases, which drive global warming. In addition to threatening less adaptive creatures than ourselves, man is negatively impacting biological resources that our own species need. Man can adapt to many things with the help of technology. The study of fossils. A fossil is the preserved remains of an organism that has died. Fossils tell scientists called paleontologists about living things such as their biology and environmental conditions over Earth's history through the rock record. Different fossil types: mold fossils, cast fossils, petrified fossils, carbonized fossils, and trace fossils. So the fossils record, like the rock record, is an important record for understanding life on Earth before the dawn of a man. So the photos below is the nearly 90% of organisms that have lived on the Earth and now extinct. So these are the example of fossils. So this is the end of my topic, and thank you.